Be me, Corbin, working as a senior project manager for a decent-sized tech firm. Not Google level, but we have big clients and the pay is good. My job is basically to keep our biggest client happy. It's a high-stress, high-reward kind of deal. The client is this old-school manufacturing giant. No-nonsense people. They only care about two things, deadlines and results. For 5 years, I've delivered both without fail. Our team was a well-oiled machine. A few guys, a few girls, nobody cared. We just got the work done. Life was pretty straightforward. Then Juliana arrived. She was a new hire, brought in from outside to be the new department head. The announcement email was full of corporate buzzwords. Synergy, paradigm shift, forward-thinking leadership, standard stuff, I guess. The first all-hands meeting with her was something else. It must have been a Monday morning because the coffee hadn't kicked in yet. She gets up on the little stage in the main conference room, starts with a big bright smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. We all expected the usual, happy to be here, let's hit our target speech. We did not get that. Instead, we got a 30-minute lecture. It was about the need to dismantle the historically patriarchal structures within our corporate environment. She talked about unconscious bias, emotional labor, and the oppressive nature of traditional workplace hierarchies. I remember looking over at one of the senior engineers, a guy who'd been with the company for 20 years. He just looked completely baffled. She finished by announcing her mission: to foster a new culture of inclusivity and to amplify marginalized voices. The room was awkwardly silent for a moment before a few people started clapping. We all just sort of filed out, not sure what to make of it all. A few days later, I got a meeting invite from her, just the two of us. I figured it was a standard introductory meeting, a chance for her to get up to speed on the big accounts. I prepared a full report, progress charts, budget breakdowns, client feedback summaries. I walk into her office. It's already been redecorated, lots of abstract art and inspirational quotes on the walls. I sit down and put my report on her desk. She doesn't even look at it. She leans forward and asks me how I would describe the power dynamics within my team. I was a bit thrown. I told her we have a flat structure, that everyone contributes, and the best idea wins, regardless of who it comes from. She just nodded slowly, like a therapist listening to a patient. She then asked if I ever felt that my communication style could be perceived as authoritative. I tried to steer the conversation back to the project. I mentioned we had a major deadline coming up, and that the client was expecting a prototype demonstration. Her response was that deadlines are often social constructs designed to enforce workplace dominance. The whole conversation felt like I was speaking a different language. I was talking about numbers and deliverables. She was talking about feelings and invisible forces. I left that meeting feeling a definite sense of unease. About a week later, the hammer dropped. I got a summons from HR. That's never a good sign. The HR lady had that professionally sympathetic look on her face. She explained that the company was undergoing a strategic restructuring of my department. My role, she said, had been deemed redundant. Redundant. After 5 years of exceeding every target and getting stellar performance reviews, they offered me a severance package, a pretty generous one, I have to admit. Or, she said, I could accept a transfer to the internal logistics department. It was a clear step down, less responsibility, less pay, and zero client interaction. It was a classic case of being managed out. They didn't have grounds to fire me, so they were making my position so unappealing that I'd quit. I thought about it for a minute. My pride was telling me to take the money and walk. But something else, a kind of morbid curiosity, made me pause. I wanted to see what would happen next. So, to the complete surprise of the HR lady, I accepted the transfer. The next day, Juliana sent out a company-wide email. It was a masterpiece of corporate speak. It announced the successful completion of her departmental realignment. It celebrated the creation of a new, dynamic, all-female project team to handle the company's most important client account, my old account. She introduced the new team members. The new team lead was a woman named Sadie. I knew Sadie. She was ambitious, politically savvy, and very good at taking credit for other people's work. Then there was Brooklyn. She was a recent hire, fresh out of college, always talking about the importance of creating safe spaces in the break room. Her professional experience was basically zero. The final member was Noe. Noe was a quiet but brilliant software engineer who had been in another department. She was genuinely talented, probably one of the best coders in the company. I felt a little bad for her. She was a workhorse, not a politician. The email ended with a triumphant line about this being a bold step towards a more equitable and collaborative future. I read the email sitting at my new, smaller desk in the logistics department and just shook my head. The circus was about to begin. My new job was painfully boring. I went from managing a multi-million-dollar project to coordinating office supply orders. But it had one perk. I had a lot of free time, and I still had friends in my old department. The stories started trickling in almost immediately. The first big team meeting for the new project was apparently a disaster. My friend told me it was scheduled for 2 hours to plan the first project sprint. Instead of discussing tasks and timelines, Brooklyn insisted that they couldn't begin working until they had established a circle of trust. She proposed that each team member go around and share a story about a time they felt marginalized by the patriarchy. Juliana, caught in her own trap, couldn't really refuse without looking like a hypocrite, so they spent the entire meeting talking about their feelings. Sadie, being the shark she was, apparently used the opportunity to subtly undermine Juliana. She shared a story about a previous manager who had a top-down leadership style that stifled creativity, looking pointedly at Juliana the whole time. Noe, according to my friend, just sat there in silence, looking like she wanted the floor to swallow her up. Not a single line of code was discussed. The project was already a day behind schedule. This became the new normal. Their daily stand-up meetings, which are supposed to be a quick 15-minute check-in, regularly stretched into hour-long therapy sessions. Brooklyn would frequently interrupt technical discussions to ask how a particular decision made everyone feel. Any disagreement was framed not as a professional difference of opinion, but as a personal attack. The team's internal chat channel, which used to be for quick questions and file sharing, was now filled with articles about corporate feminism and arguments over semantics. Noe was trying to carry the entire technical load on her own. She would work late, trying to make up for the time wasted in these endless meetings. She built a working back-end framework for the project in the first 2 weeks. It was a solid piece of work, something that should have put them on the right track. She presented it to the team during a weekly review. The feedback she got was unbelievable. Brooklyn complained that the technical documentation was intimidating and used gendered language. She pointed to the terms master and slave databases, which are standard industry terms, as evidence of a problematic mindset. Sadie, who barely knew how to open a command prompt, criticized the color scheme of the code editor Noe used in her presentation. Juliana, as the manager, should have stepped in and focused the conversation on the functionality, but she didn't. She just nodded and said it was valuable feedback. Noe had to spend the next 3 days rewriting the documentation with more inclusive terminology. The actual functional code was completely ignored. Meanwhile, I was in logistics, tracking shipments of ergonomic chairs. I'd occasionally see Noe in the cafeteria. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. One time, she came up to me at the coffee machine. She just looked at me and said, "You got out at the right time." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press her. She didn't have to. The power struggle between Juliana and Sadie was also escalating. Juliana wanted the team to follow a plan, her plan. Sadie countered every decision by framing it as an attack on the team's collaborative spirit. If Juliana assigned a specific task to someone, Sadie would propose they put it to a vote. If Juliana set a deadline, Sadie would argue that they shouldn't be constrained by arbitrary timelines. She was using Juliana's own progressive rhetoric against her, and it was working. The rest of the team was siding with Sadie because her approach meant less actual work. Juliana was losing control of her own dream team. The first concrete sign of trouble came about a month into the project: the client. I knew the account manager, a guy named Henderson. He was as old school as they come. He called me on my personal cell. He'd kept my number. He sounded confused and annoyed. He said he hadn't received a single weekly progress report since I left the project. I always sent one every Friday, without fail. It was part of our agreement. He said he'd tried emailing the new manager, Juliana, but her replies were vague and full of corporate jargon. He asked her for a simple percentage of project completion. She apparently sent him a long email about how they were recontextualizing the definition of progress and focusing on building a sustainable and emotionally resonant framework. Henderson told me, "Corbin, I don't know what the hell any of that means. Is the damn thing built or not?" I played dumb, of course. I told him I was in a different department now and had no visibility into the project. I advised him to try and schedule a formal call with her to get a direct answer. I knew that call would be a train wreck, and I was right. My friend gave me the full story a few days later. The client had insisted on a video conference with the whole team to get a status update. Juliana tried to prepare the team, basically begging them to present a united, competent front. The call started, and Henderson immediately asked for a live demonstration of the prototype. The prototype that Noe had finished weeks ago, but was still being held up by arguments over inclusive documentation. There was a panicked silence from the team. Juliana tried to deflect, talking about the ideation phase they were in. Henderson wasn't having it. He said, "The proposal said you'd have a functional prototype by this date." Sadie then jumped in, trying to make herself look good. She said that the original timeline, developed under the previous leadership, was unrealistic and aggressive. She was throwing me under the bus, even though I was no longer there. Then Brooklyn made things 1,000 times worse. She unmuted herself and told the client, a man in his late 60s, that his focus on rigid deadlines was indicative of a toxic masculine mindset. There was just dead silence on the line. Henderson, to his credit, remained calm. He just said, "So, there is no prototype." Juliana finally admitted that it wasn't ready to be shown. He thanked them for their time and ended the call. The fallout was immediate. Juliana got a furious email from her own boss, the VP, who had been CC'd on the meeting invite. The pressure was suddenly on. The facade of their progressive utopia was crumbling and reality was setting in. Juliana tried to clamp down. She sent a stern email to her team, saying that from now on, all communication would follow a strict hierarchy, and all tasks would be assigned directly by her. She was abandoning the collaborative model and trying to impose order. This was the moment Sadie had been waiting for. She immediately forwarded Juliana's email to HR. She also sent it to a few other female employees in the department, with a note saying she was deeply concerned by Juliana's sudden shift to a hostile and authoritarian management style. She was painting Juliana as a traitor to the cause. Brooklyn, of course, backed her up completely. She filed her own complaint with HR, claiming that Juliana's new rules were creating a psychologically unsafe work environment. So now Juliana was not only failing the project, but she was also being formally investigated by her own company for being a toxic manager, all based on the very principles she herself had championed. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. No, the only person actually trying to work was caught in the crossfire. She had two managers giving her conflicting instructions. Juliana was telling her to work overtime and get the prototype ready at all costs. Sadie was telling her that she shouldn't be forced to work under such stressful conditions, and that she should prioritize her well-being. I saw her in the parking lot one evening. It was late, almost 9 p.m. As she was just sitting in her car, not moving. She looked completely defeated. The project was now weeks behind schedule. The client was furious. The team was in open rebellion against its own leader, and Juliana, the architect of this whole mess, was completely trapped. Every move she made was wrong. If she was lenient, nothing got done, and Sadie undermined her. If she was strict, she was labeled a toxic, authoritarian hypocrite. She had created a system that was designed to self-destruct, and we were all just watching it happen, one disastrous meeting at a time. The final presentation to the client was scheduled for the end of the quarter. It was a hard deadline, written into the contract. Failure to deliver a finished product by that date would result in severe financial penalties for our company, and more importantly, the almost certain loss of the client. Everyone knew this was the final showdown. The atmosphere in the office in the weeks leading up to it was incredibly tense. Juliana was a ghost. She spent most of her time in closed-door meetings with her boss and HR. Sadie was walking around like she already owned the place, holding informal check-ins with the team to boost morale, which was really just a way to solidify her position as the de facto leader. Brooklyn was busy researching company policies on mental health days, and Noe was just coding. She had completely isolated herself, wore noise-canceling headphones all day. She was trying to build an entire complex piece of software by herself in a matter of weeks. It was an impossible task. I almost felt sorry for Juliana. Almost. She had brought this all on herself. She had sacrificed competence for ideology, and now she was about to pay the price. The final week before the presentation arrived, the whole department was walking on eggshells. The story of the all-female dream team had become a sort of open secret, a cautionary tale whispered at the water cooler. It was no longer a bold social experiment, it was a dumpster fire, and everyone was just waiting for the final explosion. The day of the big presentation arrived. It was a gray, overcast morning, which felt strangely appropriate. The entire office was quiet, not a productive quiet, but a nervous, holding its breath quiet. I was at my desk in logistics, processing an invoice for a new batch of toner cartridges, but my mind, like everyone else's, was on the big glass conference room on the third floor. My sources had filled me in on the final days of preparation. It was, by all accounts, a complete meltdown. Juliana had tried to take full command, working 18-hour days to stitch together something, anything, that looked like a finished product. She had basically locked herself and Noe in a room with a whiteboard. The problem was, Juliana didn't understand the technical side of things at all, so she would draw vague diagrams of synergistic user experiences and holistic engagement funnels. Then she'd demand Noe turn those buzzwords into functional code in a matter of hours. Noe, running on caffeine and sheer willpower, was doing her best to translate the corporate poetry into something real. But she was just one person. Meanwhile, Sadie and Brooklyn had effectively checked out. Sadie was busy networking, having coffee chats with people from other departments, presumably laying the groundwork for her next move after the inevitable crash. She was positioning herself as someone who had tried to salvage the project from Juliana's mismanagement. Brooklyn had declared that the stress of the impending deadline was triggering for her. She spent most of the final week working from home, sending occasional emails about the importance of team wellness and self-care. The final dress rehearsal, the day before the presentation, was the breaking point. They gathered in a conference room to do a run-through. Noe presented the prototype. It was functional, barely. The core features were there, but it was riddled with bugs and the user interface was a mess. It was what you'd expect from one person doing the work of 5 in a fraction of the allotted time. Instead of gratitude or constructive feedback, Noe was met with a fresh wave of criticism. Brooklyn said the color palette gave her anxiety. Sadie pointed out a typo in one of the menus and treated it like a fatal flaw in the project's entire architecture. Juliana, panicked and frayed, started blaming Noe for not working fast enough. That's when Noe finally snapped. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just stood up, closed her laptop, and said in a very quiet, very calm voice, "I'm done." She walked out of the room, went to her desk, packed her personal belongings in a small box, and left the building. She emailed her resignation to HR from the parking lot. So, on the morning of the most important presentation in the company's recent history, the team's only competent member was gone. The presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. The client delegation arrived early, 4 of them, all men in dark suits, led by Henderson. They looked like they were attending a funeral. Juliana's boss, the VP, was also there. He sat at the back of the room, his arms crossed, his face a mask of grim neutrality. He was there to witness the execution. Juliana, Sadie, and Brooklyn walked in. Juliana looked pale, like she hadn't slept in a week. Sadie had a look of calm detachment, as if she were just an interested observer. Brooklyn was scrolling on her phone until the very last second. The presentation began. Juliana was clicking through the slides. They were awful, just walls of text, filled with the same empty buzzwords she always used. She was talking, but her voice was shaky. She had lost all of her usual confidence. She was halfway through a slide titled, "Leveraging Intersectional Paradigms for a User-Centric Tomorrow," when Henderson held up a hand. "Juliana," he said, his voice flat, "can we please just see the product?" A wave of panic flashed across Juliana's face. She stammered something about wanting to provide the proper strategic context first. Sadie saw her opening and jumped in. "What Juliana means," she said, cutting her off, "is that the product is best understood as a part of a larger philosophical framework." She was trying to sound smart, but it just made things worse. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "I don't need a philosophy lesson. I need to see the software that my company has paid 7 figures for." There was no more hiding. Juliana took a deep breath and navigated to the prototype, or what was left of it. Without Noe there to run it properly, it was a catastrophe. Juliana clicked on the login button. An error message popped up. She tried again. The same error. She started clicking frantically, a bead of sweat running down her temple. Sadie tried to intervene again, saying there must be a compatibility issue with the conference room's projector. One of the client's technical guys, a younger man, spoke up. "That's a database connection error. It has nothing to do with the projector." The room fell silent. The lie had been exposed, instantly and clinically. The humiliation was palpable. Juliana just stood there, frozen, staring at the error message on the screen. It was over, and she knew it. But then it got even worse. The facade of sisterhood and collaboration vaporized in an instant. Primal survival instincts took over. Juliana was the first to break. She turned to the client, her voice cracking. She said that the project had been consistently undermined by a lack of team cohesion and insubordination. She didn't name Sadie, but she looked right at her. Sadie's calm demeanor vanished. She stood up and addressed the client directly. She said that, as second in command, she had repeatedly raised concerns about Juliana's erratic and unfocused leadership. She claimed she had done her best to steer the ship in the right direction, but had been met with resistance at every turn. They were openly attacking each other in front of the client and the VP. And then, Brooklyn, in a moment of spectacular self-destruction, decided to contribute. She spoke up, her voice quivering with indignation. She looked at Henderson and said that she felt his aggressive and demanding line of questioning was creating a hostile environment. She said that the team's emotional well-being had been compromised by the client's unrealistic expectations. That was it, the final nail in the coffin. Henderson just stared at her for a long moment. There was no anger on his face, just a kind of weary disbelief. He slowly closed his notepad. He stood up. The other 3 men from his company stood up with him. He looked at the VP at the back of the room, not at the 3 women at the front. "We're done here," he said. "Consider the contract terminated." And then they just walked out of the room. They didn't slam the door. They didn't shout. It was quiet, professional, and absolutely brutal. For about 30 seconds, nobody in the room moved or spoke. Juliana, Sadie, and Brooklyn just stood there amidst the wreckage. Then the VP stood up. He walked to the front of the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He looked at the 3 of them, one by one. Then he looked at Juliana and said just 2 words. "My office, now." He turned and walked out. Juliana followed him like a robot, her face completely blank. The news spread through the company faster than a wildfire. The loss of our biggest client. The public implosion of Juliana's dream team. It was the only thing anyone was talking about. Juliana was fired before lunch. She was escorted out of the building by security, carrying her inspirational quotes in a cardboard box. There was no company-wide email announcing her departure. She just vanished. Sadie's political maneuvering had failed spectacularly. She wasn't fired, but she was seen as toxic. Her attempt to blame Juliana had backfired, making her look treacherous and unprofessional in front of the VP. She was demoted and moved to a do-nothing role in the marketing department. Her career at the company was effectively over. Brooklyn was part of the round of layoffs that was announced the following week to offset the financial impact of the lost contract. Nobody was surprised. As for Noe, I heard she got a job at a major competitor within a week, a senior engineering role with a massive pay raise. Good for her. The dust began to settle. The company was in crisis mode. The stock price took a hit. Morale was at an all-time low. I just kept my head down in the logistics department, ordering staples and managing spreadsheets. About a week after the presentation disaster, I got an email. It was from the VP's executive assistant. The subject line was simple: meeting. I walked into the VP's office, the same one Juliana had been summoned to before she was fired. He looked tired, but he got straight to the point. He said the company was in a difficult position. He said they had made a mistake. He didn't mention Juliana by name. He just talked about a failed leadership experiment. He said that their number one priority was trying to salvage the relationship with the client. He told me that Henderson had specifically mentioned my name in his final conversation, noting that things never went wrong when Corbin was in charge. Then he made me an offer. He wanted me to head a new special projects team, a crisis team, basically. My first task would be to go back to the client, hat in hand, and try to win them back. He offered me my old job back, with a new title, a significant raise, and complete autonomy to build my team however I saw fit. I don't care who you hire, he said. Male, female, young, old. I just care about one thing: competence. Find me the most competent people for the job. I told him I'd do it. The next Monday, I walked back into my old office. The abstract art and inspirational quotes were gone. It was just a blank canvas. It felt good. I spent the whole morning on the phone with HR and various department heads. I was building my new team. I brought back the senior engineer who had been baffled by Juliana's speech. I hired a sharp young woman from the analytics department who was known for being a data wizard. I called a guy I used to work with who had left the company a year ago, one of the best project architects I knew, and convinced him to come back. The list of names on my notepad was a mix of men and women. The only thing they had in common was that they were all very, very good at their jobs. My last action of the day was to open up my email. I drafted a message to Henderson. It was short and to the point. I apologized for the recent breakdown in communication. I informed him that I was back in charge of his account, and I asked if he would be willing to give us one more chance, a 30-minute call, to show him a concrete plan for how we were going to fix this. I hit send. Then I leaned back in my chair. There was a mountain of work to do, a disaster to clean up. But for the first time in months, things felt clear. The noise was gone. The ideology was gone. There was just the work, and a team of capable people ready to do it. It was a good start.